The Red-Headed Dead, a Reverend Jebediah Mercer tale by Joe R. Lansdale. East Texas, 1880. Reverend Mercer knew it was coming because the clouds were being plucked down into a black funnel, making the midday sky go dark. It was the last of many omens, and he knew from experience it smacked of more than a prediction of bad weather. There had been the shooting star last night, bleeding across the sky in a looping red wound. He had never seen one like it, and there had been the angry face he had seen in the morning clouds, ever so briefly, but long enough to know that God was sending him another task in his endless list. He paused his horse on a high hill and pushed his hat up slightly, determining the direction of the storm. When the funnels were yanked earthward and touched, he saw, as he expected, that the twister was tearing up earth and heading swiftly in his direction. He cursed the God he served unwillingly and plunged his mount down the hill as the sky spat rain and the wind began to howl and blow at his back like the damp breath of a pursuing giant. Down the hill and into the depths of the forest his horse went, thundering along the pine needle trail, dashing for any cover he might find. As he rode, to his left, mixed in with the pines and a great oak that dipped its boughs almost to the ground, was a graveyard. He saw at a glance the gravestones had slipped and cracked, been torn up by tree roots, erosion, and time. One grave had a long metal rod poking up from it nearly 6 feet out of the ground. The rod was leaning from the ground at a precarious due west. It appeared as if it were about to fall loose of the earth. The pine needle trail wound from the trees and dipped down into a clay path that was becoming wet and slick and blood red. When he turned yet another curve, he saw tucked into the side of a hill a crude cabin made of logs and the dirt that surrounded it. The roof was covered in dry mud, probably packed down over some kind of pine slab roofing. The Reverend rode his horse right up to the door and called out. No one answered. He dismounted. The door was held in place by a flip-up switch of wood. The Reverend pressed it and opened it, led his horse inside. There was a bar of crudely split wood against the wall. He lifted it and clunked it into position between 2 rusted metal hooks on either side of the doorway. There was a window with fragments of parchment paper in place of glass. There was more open space than parchment, and the pieces that remained fluttered in the wind like peeling dead skin. Rain splattered through. Down through the trees swirled the black meanness from heaven, gnawing trees out of the ground and turning them upside down, throwing their roots to the sky like desperate fingers, the fingers shedding wads of red clay as if it were clotted blood. The Reverend's horse did a strange thing. It went to its knees and ducked its head as if in prayer. The storm tumbled down the mountain in a rumbling wave of blackness, gave off a locomotive sound. This was followed by trees and the hills sliding down toward the cabin at tremendous speed, like mashed potatoes slipping down a leaning plate. Gravestones flew through the air. The Reverend saw that great iron bar sailing his way like a javelin. He threw himself to the floor. All the world screamed. The Reverend did not pray, having decided long ago his boss had already made up his mind about things. The cabin groaned, and the roof peeled at the center, and a gap was torn upon the ceiling, open in the ceiling. The rain came through it in a deluge, splattering heavily on the Reverend's back as he lay face down, expecting at any moment to be lifted up by the wind and drawn and quartered by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Then it was over. There was no light at the window because mud and trees had plugged it. There was a bit of daylight coming from the hole in the roof. It filled the room with a kind of hazy shade of gold. When the Reverend rose up, he discovered the steel bar had come through the window and gone straight through his horse's head. The animal still rested forward on its front legs, its butt up, the bar having gone into one ear and out the other. The horse had gone dead before it knew it was struck. The only advantage to his dead mount, the Reverend thought, was that now he would have fresh meat. He had been surviving on corn dodgers for a week, going where God sent him by directions nestled inside his head. In that moment, the Reverend realized that God had brought him here for a reason. It was never a pleasant reason. There would be some horror, as always, and he would be pitted against it. Less, he thought, for need of destroying evil, but more out of heavenly entertainment, like burning ants to a crisp with the magnified heat of the sun shining through the lens of a pair of spectacles. The Reverend studied the iron bar that had killed his horse. There was writing on it. He knelt down and looked at it. It was Latin, and the words trailed off into the horse's ear. The Reverend grabbed the bar and twisted the horse's head towards the floor, put his boot against the horse's skull, and pulled. The bar came out with a pop and a slurp, covered in blood and brain matter. The Reverend took a rag from the saddlebag and wiped the rod clean. Knowing Latin, he read the words. They simply said, "And this shall hold him down." "Ah, hell," the Reverend said, and tossed the bar to the floor. This would be where God had sent him. And what was coming he could only guess. But a bar like that one, made of pure iron, was often used to pin something in its grave. Iron was a nemesis of evil, and Latin, besides being a nemesis to a student of language, often contained more powerful spells than any other tongue, alive or dead. And if what was out there was in need of pinning, then the fact that Twister had pulled the bar free by means of the literal wet and windy hand of God meant something that should not be free was loose. For the first time in a long time, Reverend Mercer thought he might defy God and find his way out of here, if he could. But he knew it was useless. Whatever had been freed was coming, and it was his job to stop it. If he didn't stop it, then it would stop him. And not only would his life end, but his soul would be flung from him to who knows where. Heaven as a possibility would not be on the list, if there was, in fact, a heaven. There was a clatter on the roof, and the Reverend looked up, caught sight of something leering through the gap. When he did, it pulled back and out of sight. The Reverend lifted his guns out of their holsters, a .44 converted Colt at his hip, and a .36 Navy Colt in the shoulder holster under his arm. He had the .44 in his right fist, the Navy in his left. His bullets were touched with drops of silver, blessed by himself with readings from the Bible. Against Hell's minions, it was better than nothing, which was a little like saying it was better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. The face had sent a chill up his back like a wet-leg scorpion scuttling along his spine. It was hardly a face at all. Mostly bone with rags of flesh where cheeks once were. Dark pads of rotting meat above its eyes. The top of its head had been curiously full of fire-red hair, all of it wild and wadded and touched with clay. The mouth had been drawn back in the grin of a ghoul, long fangs showing. The eyes had been the worst, red as blood spots, hot as fire. Reverend Mercer knew immediately, or some people pronounce it immediately, what it was. The progeny of Judas. A vampire. Those that had descended from he who had given death to Christ for a handful of silver. Christ, that ineffectual demigod that had fooled many into thinking the heart of God had changed. It had not. That delusion was all part of the great bastard's game. There was movement on the roof, heavy as an elephant one moment, and then light and skittering like an excited squirrel. The Reverend backed across the room and found a corner just as the thing stuck its head through the gap in the roof again. It stretched its neck, which was long and barely covered in skin, showing little greasy discs of bone that creaked when its long neck swayed. Like a serpent, it stretched through the roof, dropping its hands forward, the fingers long and multiple jointed, clicking together like bug legs. It was hanging from the gap by its feet. It was naked, but whatever its sex, that had long dissolved to dust, and there was only a parchment of skin over its ribs, and its pelvis was nothing more than bone, its legs being little more than withered gray muscle tied against the bone. It twisted its head and looked at the Reverend. The Reverend cocked his revolvers. The monster snapped its feet together, disengaging from the roof, allowing it to fall. It dropped lightly, landed on the damp horse, lifted its head, and sniffed the air. It spotted the Reverend, but the dead animal was too inviting. It swung its head and snapped its teeth into the side of the dead horse's neck, made a sucking noise that brought blood out of the beast in a spray that decorated the vampire's face and mouth. Spots of blood fell on the sunlit floor like rose petals. It roved one red eye toward the Reverend as it ate. It had the kind of look that said, "You're next." The Reverend fired his pistols. The bullets tore into the creature, blue hellfire blasting out of the wounds they made. The thing sprang like a cricket, came across the floor toward the Reverend, who fired both revolvers rapidly, emptying them, knocking wounds in the thing that spurted sanctified flames, but still it came. The Reverend let loose with a grunt and a groan, racked the monster upside the head with the heavy .44. It was like striking a tree. Then he was flung backwards by two strong arms against the window packed with limbs and leaves and mud. The impact knocked the revolvers from his hands. It came at him like a shot, hissing as if it were a snake. The Reverend's boot caught the skin and bone brute in the chest and drove it back until it hit the floor. It bounced up immediately, charged again. The Reverend... One moment, I apologize. It bounced up immediately, charged again. The Reverend snapped out a left jab and hooked with a right. Caught the thing with both punches, rocked its rotten head. But still it came. The Reverend jabbed again, crossed with a right uppercut with a left, and slammed a right hook to the ribs. One of them popped loose and poked through the skin like a barrel stave that had come undone. It sprang forward and clutched the Reverend's throat with both hands. Would have plunged its teeth into his face had the Reverend not grabbed it under the chin and shoved it back, and kicked it hard in the chest, sending it tumbling over the horse's body. The Reverend sprang toward the iron bar, grabbed it, swung it, and hit the fiend a brisk blow across the neck, driving it to the ground. His next move was to plunge the bar into it, spinning it, pinning it once more to the ground in the manner it had been pinned in its grave, but he was too slow. The creature scrambled across the floor on all fours, avoiding the stab, which clunked into the hard dirt floor. It sprang up and through the hole in the roof before the Reverend could react. As the last of it disappeared, the Reverend fell back exhausted, watching the gap for its reemergence. Nothing. The Reverend found his pistols and reloaded. They hadn't done much to kill the thing, but he liked to believe his blessed loads had at least hampered it some. He worked the saddlebag off his horse, flung it over his shoulder. He tried the door and couldn't open it. Too much debris had rammed up against it. He stood on his dead mount, poked the bar through the hole in the ceiling, pushed it through the gap far enough that he could use both ends of it to rest on the roof and chin himself up. On the roof, he looked about for it, saw it scuttling over a mass of mud and broken trees like a spider toward a darkening horizon. Night was coming, dripping in on wet, dark feet. The Reverend thought that if his reading on the subject was right, this descendant of Judas would gain strength as the night came. Not a good thing for a man that had almost been whipped and eaten by it during the time when it was supposed to be at its weakest. Once again, the Reverend considered defying that which God had given him to do, but he knew it was pointless. Terror would come to him if he did not go for it, and any reward he might have had in heaven would instead be a punishment in hell. As it was even doing God's bidding, he was uncertain of reward or of heaven's existence. All he knew was there was a God, and it didn't like much of anything besides its sport. The Reverend climbed down from the roof with the rod, stepping on the mass of debris covering the door and window, wiggled his way through broken trees, went in the direction the vampire had gone. He went fast like a deranged mouse, eager to throw itself into the jaws of a lion. As he wound his way up the hill, it started to rain again. This was followed by hail the size of 44 slugs. He noticed off to his left a bit of the graveyard that remained, a few stones and a great shadowy hole where the rod had been. With the night coming, he was sure the vampire would be close by, and though he didn't think it would return to the grave where it had been pinned for who knew how long, he went there to check. The grave was dark and empty except for rising rainwater. It was a deep hole, that grave, maybe 10 feet deep. Someone had known what the thing was and how to stop it, at least until time released it. The light of the day was completely gone now, and there was no moon. With the way the weather had turned, he would be better off fleeing back to the house and waiting until morning to pursue. He knew where it would be going if it didn't come back for him, the first available town and a free lunch. He was about to fulfill that plan of hole up and wait and see when the dark became darker. And in that instant, he knew it was coming up behind him. It was said these things did not cast a reflection, but they certainly cast a shadow, even when it was too dark for there to be one. The Reverend wheeled with the iron bar in hand, and the thing hit him with a flying leap and knocked him backwards into the grave, splashing down into the water. Excuse me. The bar ended up lying across the grave above them. The Reverend pulled his .44 as he kicked the beast back. It was on him as he fired, clamping its teeth over the barrel of the revolver. The Reverend's shot took out a huge chunk of the back of the thing's head, but still it stood, growling and gnawing, and shaking the barrel of the gun like a dog worrying a bone. The barrel snapped like a rotten twig. The vampire spat it out. The Reverend hit him with what remained of the gun. It had about as much effort as swatting a bull with a feather. The Reverend dropped the weapon and grasped the thing at its biceps, trying to hold it back. They went down together, splashing in the cold, muddy water of the grave, the vampire trying to bring its teeth close to the Reverend's face. The Reverend slugged the thing repeatedly. Kicking the thing off of him, the Reverend came to his feet, leaped and grabbed the bar, swung up on it, and out of the grave. Still clutching the bar, he stumbled backwards. The vampire hopped out of the hole effortlessly, as if the grave had been no deeper than the depth of a cup. As it sprang, the Reverend, weary, fell back and brought the rod up. The sky grew darker as the thing came down in a blind lunge of shape and shadow. Its body caught the tip of the rod, and the point of it tore through the monster with a sound like someone bending too quick in tight pants and tearing the ass out of them. The vampire screamed so loud and oddly, the Reverend thought the sound might knock him out of the sureness of a blow. But he held fast, the world wavering, the thing struggling on the end of the rod, slowly sliding down, its body swirling around the metal spear like a snake on a spit, then bunching up like a doodle-bug to make a knot at the end of the makeshift spear. Then it was still. The Reverend dropped the bar and came up on one knee and looked at the thing pinned on it. It was nothing more now than a ball of bone and tattered flesh. The Reverend lifted the rod and vampire into the wet grave, shoved the iron shaft into the ground hard. Rain and hail pounded the Reverend's back, but still he pushed at the bar until it was deep, and the thing was beneath the rising water in the grave. Weakly, the Reverend staggered down the hill, climbed over the debris in the cabin, and dropped through the roof. He found a place in the corner where he could sit upright, rest his back against the wall. He pulled out his .36 Navy and sat there with it on his thigh, not quite sleeping, but dozing off and on like a cat. As he slept, he dreamed the thing came loose of the grave several times during the night. Each time he awoke, snapping his eyes open in fright. The fiend he expected was nothing more than dream. He breathed a sigh of relief. He was fine. He was in the cabin. There was no vampire. Only the pounding of rain and hail through the hole in the roof, splashing and smacking against the corpse of his horse. The next morning, the Reverend climbed out of the cabin by means of his horse footstool and went out through the hole in the roof. He walked back to the grave. He found his saddlebags on the edge of it, where they had fallen during the attack. He had forgotten all about them. Pistol drawn, he looked into the grave. It was near filled with muddy water. He put the revolver away, grabbed hold of the rod, and worked it loose, lifted it out to see if the thing was still pinned. It was, knotted up on the rod like a horrible ball of messy twine. The Reverend worked it back into the grave, pushing the bar as deep as he could, then dropped to his knees and set about pushing mud and debris into the hole. It took him all of the morning and past high noon to finish up. When he was done, he took a Bible from his saddlebags and read some verses. Then he poked the book into the mud on top of the grave. It and the rod would help to hold the thing down. With luck, the red-headed dead would stay truly dead for a long time. When he was done, The Reverend opened his saddlebags and found that his matches wrapped in wax paper had stayed dry. He sighed with relief. With the saddlebags flung over his shoulder, he went back to the cabin to cut off a slab of horse meat. He had hopes he could find enough dry wood to cook it before starting his long walk out, going to where he was led by the godly fire that burned in his head. The Old Slow Man and His Gold Gun from Space by Ben H. Winters. Sacramento, California, 1851. Whether Caleb and Crane came out to California separate and partnered up later on, or whether they knew each other from some eastern clime and made their way westward as a pair, well, who the devil can tell? And what the devil does it matter? Suffice it to say, that whether they came to their claim as partners or came to it alone, Crane and Caleb came the same as all the rest of them. Maybe overland on some slow-rolling desperation caravan from Oxford, Mississippi, or Albany, New York, jouncing on rutted wheels through Salt Lake, Deadwood, Barstow. Maybe aboard a leaky old cutter, or rounding down around Cape Horn, dipping and rolling on the seasick waves. Some way or other, the point is they came, drawn like iron shavings to a magnet, drawn to the golden promises of Sutter's Mill, drawn by hope, fool's hope, by that same mania that had lit up the eyes of poor men, rich men, and credulous men and wise, that had seized 'em up and drawn 'em down from all across the continent and all around the world. Caleb and Crane weren't nothing special, and never would they have been, if it weren't for the spacemen. "Tomorrow," Caleb would assure his partner every night before stretching out weary on his thick rucksack, emptying out his day's sad pocket full of flakes and powder. "We'll strike it rich tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Crane would answer, and then they'd close their eyes. The both of 'em closed their weary eyes and dreamed their dead dreams of gold. Tomorrow never seemed to come, though. Not for most of 'em out there. Certainly not for Caleb and Crane. April through May, May to June. Heavy work, long days. Flakes and dust. A teensy nugget now and again. Now and again a tiny little half of a half ounce of gold. Nothing to speak of. Nothing to hold. Just enough to keep you scratching at it. This was the summer of 1851. Long ago the easy pickings had been picked. Long ago, them few big winners that was ever gonna be had filled their pockets, filled their buckets, filled their wagon beds up with gold, rolled away. And yet they said it. Caleb and Crane felt it too, in aching bones. Needed to know that it was true. Tomorrow. Caleb, so you know, was big. Legs like ox legs, neck like a bull neck, torso like the petrified trunk of an old growth tree. Sturdy and unbending. He looked not like a man or woman born, but like a figure of a man someone carved in a barn door and animated by some manner of charm. Sturdy muscled golem, fit to hoe a row, work a shovel, dig a mine. Crane was little, taut and thin, steely as a loop of wire, with a long nose and a little delicate glasses perched on the end of it. You'd have seen the two of them, Caleb with his ropey neck and ship's anchor's fist, Crane with his spectacles, and you'd figure Crane was the brains of the operation. But you'd have been wrong. There weren't no brains of this operation, just sweat and hope and tired, exhausted dreams of the mother lode. June to July, August to September, camped out there on the lip of their rutted square acre on the Sacramento banks, their dope's claim. Giant Caleb and wiry Crane with their ramshackle cabin and rickety apparatuses, digging and muttering about tomorrow. 6 months their drumbeat was the flat thud of shovel on clay, the rat-a-tat of new handfuls of gravel, the day-long rush of water sluicing through the long tom, the rusty scrick of the cradle as it rocked, separating, seeking. If you'd have said to big Caleb at some point that long summer, "You're madmen, you and your friend," he'd have laughed. A snorting bull's laughter, pointed you away with the long barrel of his rifle. If you'd have said to Crane, "You're madmen, you're dunces, you'll die out here before you strike it rich," he'd have chuckled bitterly, told you to do something dirty with a donkey, twisted his small bent body back to the work of his shovel. It would have been as crazy as to say that a man from Neptune will come, make you a strange proposition, then die of violence on the banks of your claim. That's what happened, though. One night, late September, that is indeed what did occur. Oh, hell. Ooh. Wake up there, you boys. I got a proposition for you. This is what the old man said by way of greeting, but too quiet to rouse Caleb and Crane from their respective Golden Castle dreams. "Wake up there," he repeated, a little louder, loud enough now. "Who's that?" said Crane, blinking awake. "It's a goddamn tramp," answered Caleb. "It's who it is," and hefted himself into a sitting position, landed his big bare feet on the dirt floor of the cabin. It was so late it was almost early, almost the next day. The old man, ancient and tiny and slow, was surrounded by dawn's first glow, so that with his wild, uncombed white hair and his lined face, he looked a little like a saint, a little like a ghost. "All good," muttered the man. "You're stirring." The old man's voice was harsh and gravelly. He was bent with age, and his right arm was shriveled and deformed. His mustache was bushy, yellow, and unkempt. He wheezed heavily. Over his shoulder was a black sack. Caleb was on his feet now, holding the old man steadily, with the creaky, long-barreled hunting rifle he'd fetched out from under his pillow. "The heck you want?" "I already said." The old man cleared his throat laboriously, tottered unsteadily into the cabin, cast a quick glance at big Caleb's long rifle like it was a children's finger puller. "I got a proposition for you." "Now wait a minute. Wait just 1 minute," sputtered Crane, snatching his spectacles from beside his bedroll and sliding them into place. "Just who the devil are you?" "Well, I reckon that I could tell you my name, but it won't do so much good," said the old slow man. His white hair was a wiry tangle atop his thin head. It's in a language you won't understand."
"You mean Spanish? You're wrong about that,"
said Crane, who prided himself on his como estas and his uno dos traces, which he picked off a Mexican whore. The old man snorted. "Not Espanol, son. I'm from Neptune, the dark side of the planet Neptune." There was a long silence in that moment after the old slow man said he'd come from the dark side of the planet Neptune. In the dawn outside the cabin you could hear the pleasant morning babbling of the crook, or the creek, whatever you say. Hear the gentle morning calling of the California birds roosting in their California trees. If someone in the proper frame of mind were there, well, they might have felt that the surroundings were downright peaceful. It might have occurred to such a tranquil observer that whatever precious metals were or were not to be found beneath the surface, there was a copious bounty of a different kind. The squirrels at play, the sound glimmering off the green, right here out in the open. No one in the present company, however, was in such a frame of mind.
"Did you say you from Neptune?"
said Caleb. "Yep," said the old man, and coughed. "The dark side." Caleb drew back the hammer of his rifle.
"What? Where is Neptune?"
said Crane, looking from the old slow man to Caleb and back to the man.
"What is that?"
"It's a planet," said Caleb, gesturing heavenward with the barrel of the gun. "But this man ain't from there. He's from a drunk tank or an alleyway. He's a tramp or a thief." "No, sir," said the old man. "I'm from Neptune, like I said. And I got a proposition for you." "Nuh-uh," said Caleb, and spat on the ground, and leveled his rifle at the old man's face. "See, I got a proposition for you. You get the hell out of our cabin and get good and clear of our claim, or I'm gonna put a bullet inside your head. Right, Crane?" Crane didn't say nothing. He had taken off his spectacles and was staring at the old slow man, squinting, as if merely by looking at him hard enough he could puzzle out the truth or falseness of the man's wild declaration. "Crane," said Caleb. Still Crane didn't say nothing. The old man, meanwhile, stared steadily back at Caleb while the smallest curl of a smile turned up beneath his drooping mustache. "Go ahead, then," he said. "Shoot me." It was almost comical, the bravado with which the old man faced Caleb's rifle. Given how small he was, how frail, especially compared to the massive claim digger, how decrepit with age. "You're crazy, old-timer," was all Caleb could think to say, while the old man still stood there on his pipe-cleaner legs, and Crane stood there staring and scratching his head. Caleb lowered the gun so it pointed at the floor, murmured at it again. "Crazy." The old man looked around the cabin with rheumy eyes, wheezing slightly. Crane, in the meantime, still staring at the old man, had brought out his pouch of tobacco.
"Oh, hell, Caleb,"
he said, rolling himself a cigarette.
"Let's hear what he's got to say."
And that was that. Caleb shrugged. Crane pinched his cigarette closed at the ends. The old man was permitted to make his slow way into the cabin and to take his seat on one of the upturned packing crates that served receipts. And what he did next, instead of talking, was he slowly drew open the drawstring of the bulging satchel, took out an antique flint-lock pistol, dust-caked and rusted. Caleb looked at Crane. Crane shrugged. Caleb looked back at the old man. "You on your way to a costume party, old man?" "No, sir," The old man arched his eyebrows and chuckled throatily. That's a gold gun, and it's going to make you boys rich.
A gold gun?
Said Crane softly, thoughtfully even. But Caleb was scornful and agitated, shifting his big torso with irritation.
That thing ain't gold.
Well, I didn't say the gun was gold, said the old man. It's a Neptunian gun. It finds gold.
It what?
Said Crane, but his tone was more and more thoughtful, and he was looking with open interest at the battered old pistol, even as Caleb shook his head, kept on his mask of incredulousness, said, excuse me, if that there's a magical space gun, why does it look like a regular old flintlock pistol from the goddamn Mexican War? Well, why do I look like this? We aliens and our alien devices can't go around showing off our real appearances on your human planet. Your minds would burst and break from the sight of it. Hooey, said big Caleb, and he stepped forward and snatched the gun from the old man, who let it go willingly. Immediately, on touching the gold gun, Caleb felt strange. The gun had the weight of the old pistol it resembled, and the cut of the handle felt familiar, like 1,000 gun handles he'd held before. But on holding it, he felt a radiant discomfort traveling up his fingertips from the gun, up through his arms, down to his guts. It gave him a rolling kind of feeling in his stomach. He put the gold gun down, and the old man picked it up, tucked it back into his satchel. Now, he said, here's the proposition. The gun finds gold, is what the old slow man, the man who said he was from Neptune, explained to Caleb and Crane. The gun finds gold. You take it out, he said. When you're outside, when you're at a patch of ground or a length of creek, you hold it up, and you don't even pull the trigger.
What do you mean you don't pull the triggers?
Said Crane. Caleb was silent, had been silent since holding the gun, feeling the way that it made him feel. I mean just that, son. You hold it, you point it, and it jerks and jumps kinda, it dances, and it points the way to gold, to the real thing. Caleb and Crane stared at the old man, wide-eyed, rapt. So here's what we're going to do, you and me, boys, said the old man. Caleb and Crane listening intently, chewing on their mustaches, straining their minds. We spend 2 days out on your claim, relying upon the alien wisdom of my device, running its powers over your patch of dirt. We pull more gold out of that mud flat than the two of you with your pans and your hands have scrabbled up in the last 6 months.
What then?
Said Crane. What then? Well, we split it up. 60% to you two, 40% to me.
Awfully business-minded, ain't you?
Observed Crane.
For a man from outer space.
I've got no choice, the old man shrugged. What you people call gold, my people call food. And me and my people, we're running out. Food? Caleb broke his silence. This fresh bit of strangeness was too much for him. You telling me that people from the dark side of Neptune, whatever you said, you telling me they eat gold? The old man nodded, scratched his forehead, and a crust of skin fluttered down to the floor. Not just the dark side, light siders too. That's just what Neptunians eat. Back home, son, people look just
just as funny at you if you told him that you ate ham and eggs."
Caleb fell silent. Crane, meanwhile, rubbed his furrowed brow, focused agitatedly on the practicalities of the matter.
"I don't get it, old man. Your gun's so smart. Why'd you just take the thing out to the claim your own self, or out to any other claim, dig up as much as you want and make off with it? Dig yourself up a nice gold feast and leave Earth for good."
"Would that I could," said the old man, looking around the ramshackle cabin.
"But I'm tired. Where I come from, a man needs methane in his air. And the atmosphere of this damnable planet of yours has got no more methane than a bucket of spit. Wears a man out. I can't even lift a shovel in this heavy soil of yourn. I'm weak. Look at me. Every hour I spend here saps my strength. Even standing here, I feel my bones cracking, my heart pumping too fast to keep me alive. I need a couple of young, strong earthlings to do the digging for me. And like I said, I'm willing to pay for it."
Overwhelmed by this vigorous outburst, the old slow man began to cough. And he coughed so violently that he nearly doubled over in his chair. Then he settled back and closed his eyes while Caleb and Crane huddled their dusty heads together. "You know what he wants us for," Caleb said to Crane. "He wants us for mules."
"Yes,"
Crane said to Caleb, and then paused.
"at 60%.
A smile played at the corners of the lips of the old slow man. Up they all stood, and down they went to the claim. The gold gun from space worked just like the old slow man said it would. Why, it worked like the absolute devil. They walked down to the claim together, the three of them, down to that rutted quarter acre with a twisted creek down to the center of it. And stood at the edge. The old man drew the gun forth and pointed it. Didn't even pull the trigger. "You never pull the trigger," he said. And no bullet flew forth. The chamber did not turn, but the gun jerked and danced in the old man's hands, and the muzzle jumped and poked in a certain sharp direction, like the nose of a dog when it's caught a scent. Caleb and Crane watched this performance with astonishment, and when it was done, they looked in the direction that the gun had pointed, and saw that over the land in that spot the air seemed disrupted somehow, seemed to twinkle and dance. The air above that spot of land was like tissue paper that had been wrinkled and smoothed out again, and now shimmered prismatically in the daylight. And there they dug, and there they found gold. Not flakes and small bits, but ounces of it. Nuggets, thick, gorgeous clots of gold. "Eureka!" shouted Caleb. And Crane said it too.
"Eureka!"
And then again, and then again. And all that cool September morning, the old man would point the gun and its metal nose would jerk and dance. Caleb and Crane would clamber over to where the air above the ground or above the creek was disrupted, twinkling, textured, where the atmosphere had been set to sparkling. And they'd get to it with their shovels and hoes, and out would come the gold formerly so elusive, revealing itself to them, singing out to them, making itself known, like a coy lover suddenly eager to be taken. "Eureka!" hollered Caleb every time he heard that satisfying cling of his shovel's edge on a patch of the real deal.
"Eureka!"
erupted Crane, each time he felt the sharp resistance of metal striking metal down there in the muck. That beautiful jolt traveling up the sinews of his forearm. The old slow man sat on his haunches on the edge of the claim, aimed his gun, watched it work, watched Caleb and Crane chase the reward, watched them pour the gold-flecked grit into the cradle, sluice it clean, watched the golden pile grow, and then, after the fourth drawing of the gold gun, with only but a bare eighth of the claim covered so far under the hot sun of his labored existence, the old man yawned, stretched, tilted back his head, fell asleep. Caleb and Crane noted that he was asleep, looked at him, and looked at each other. As was so often the case, both of them were thinking the same thing at once. It was only a matter of who would speak it first. It was Crane.
40% is awful high,
That's what he said, whispering the words, pushing his wire glasses up the bridge of his nose where they had slipped on the slickest sweat. Awful high, Caleb agreed, nodding slowly, clapping caked dirt off his palms. This was all that needed to be said, because the gold gun was not the only armament down at the claim that day. Caleb had his hunting rifle tucked up inside his coat, the butt of it down there in his waistband, just as he did every day, in case of wildcats or gold thieves or other predators. Now he drew that old rifle free from his pants, walked up the slope, while Crane stood down in the dirt, nervous, his eyeglasses glinting against the sun. Caleb walked resolutely on his thick tree trunk legs up the muddy slope of the claim and killed the sleeping old man without ceremony, a single brutal blast right through the center of his head. The body tipped over backwards on the rocking chair and slipped soundlessly down into the dirt. The thing done, Caleb turned and looked down at Crane, who shielded his eyes against the sun, then slowly trudged up the slope too, to stand there between his companion and the body of the man he had killed. Caleb looked saddened by what he'd done. "Do you think," began Caleb, then stopped himself, sighed. His eyes were brimming with tears.
"Do you think he really was from Neptune?"
"Yes," answered Crane, speaking softly like he was speaking to himself. "He bent and lifted the gold gun off the corpse of this old slow man."
"He was."
"What?" said Caleb. Crane pulled the trigger of the gold gun, and a wash of wild blue fire poured from the muzzle, a blanket of heat and light in the air, surrounding Caleb, smothering him, boiling him alive. In an instant, a flash. Big Caleb died with a scream trapped on his lips, frozen in place as all his organs failed at once as the light washed over him. No more gold fever, no more desperation, no more sad glitter of hope for he. As for Crane, he held the flintlock pistol aloft and looked it over and whistled appreciatively. Those clever bastards from the dark side of the planet were always so much further ahead in the technology department. They really were. They couldn't survive on foreign planets near half as well as light-siders like him. But dang could they manufacture a gold gun indeed. Crane hunched over, grabbed a handful of glittering metal from the massive pile he and his poor dead partner had gathered up, and chewed it thoughtfully. There was no way around it. This gold gun heralded a major improvement in his lifestyle. Pickings had been so slim, the takes so small, that to get enough to eat, he'd needed a partner. But it had been stressful, all the sneaking around, waking in the middle of the night, eating enough of the other fellow's share to live on, but not enough to be caught. It had been an anxious, furtive existence, but he got by. May to June, June to July, August to September. Now everything would be different. Now he'd bury these two bodies, and then Crane would feast. The Hellbound Stagecoach by Mike Resnick. Arizona Territory, circa 1885. The tall, lean man stood alone on the prairie, a thin cigar in his mouth, his Stetson shielding his eyes from the sun. He wasn't sure how long he'd been waiting there, but it couldn't have been too long. It was a blazing hot day. There was no shade anywhere near him, and yet he wasn't sweating. Finally, the stagecoach came into view, drawn by a team of sleek, coal-black horses. They raced over the ground, raising endless clouds of dust. When the driver saw he had a passenger waiting, he eased them first to a trot, then a walk, and at last they came to a stop just as they reached the man. The man stared at the stagecoach, which was a little fancier than he was used to.
"Climb aboard! Climb aboard!"
said the driver, a small, gnarly man with piercing dark eyes.
"I got a schedule to keep."
The man nodded. A door opened, and he climbed into the interior of the coach as the horses started moving again. The only other passenger was a prim, middle-aged woman, her hair starting to turn gray, her dress buttoned all the way up to the neck despite the heat. She held a wicker basket on her lap.
"Good morning, ma'am."
Different person. "Good morning, ma'am," said the man, tipping his hat. "My name's Ben Bradshaw."
"And I'm Abigail Fletcher,"
she replied. "I'm pleased to make your acquaintance, ma'am," said Bradshaw, extending his hand. She took it in a firm grip and shook it. "Looks like we're going to be traveling together." She nodded her agreement.
"Have you eaten, young man?"
"I truly don't recall, ma'am," he said. "And please call me Ben." She indicated her basket.
"Would you like a biscuit?"
"I'd surely appreciate one, ma'am." She opened the basket and withdrew a tidily wrapped biscuit, offering it to him. "Thank you kindly, ma'am," said Bradshaw, unwrapping it and taking a bite. "Have you come a long ways?"
"Sometimes it feels like it,"
she responded. "I meant on the coach."
"Not that far."
"Where are you heading, ma'am?"
"The end of the line,"
she replied.
"And you, young man?"
"Ben," he corrected her. "And I'm here for the rest of the trip, too." He looked out the window at the dry, barren landscape. "Hope it gets a little cooler soon." The driver laughed at that, which surprised Bradshaw,
who hadn't thought anything they said in the coach would carry outside to where the gnarly man sat, holding the reins.
This is a right tasty biscuit, ma'am,
said Bradshaw.
Okay, enough of that. I guess I was hungrier than I thought.
What do you do for a living, young Ben?
Oh, a little of this, a little of that, nothing very interesting. I just try to earn $1 here and there. What about you, ma'am? If I was to guess, I'd say you're a schoolmarm.
He couldn't tell if the statement pleased her or annoyed her. Her expression gave nothing away.
What does a schoolmarm look like?
He searched for the right word.
Proper?
He said at last, then considered it, nodded his head, and repeated it.
Proper, like nothing much upsets you, and you've got a handle on everything.
Well, now, that could be flattering or insulting. I think I'll choose to be flattered.
I certainly didn't mean it no other way, ma'am.
He fidgeted uncomfortably for a moment.
Could I maybe trouble you for another one of them biscuits, ma'am? They make powerful good eating.
I'm very flattered.
And
of course you can have another.
She reached into the basket and handed him one.
You're sure I'm not You sure it's not an imposition, ma'am?
I packed enough for a long trip.
Well, I'll be proud and pleased to ride all the way to the end with you. You know, usually I'm tongue-tied around women, but you put me at my ease.
That's one of the nicest compliments anyone's ever paid to me. I thank you for it.
He looked out the window while he ate, watching a dust storm off in the distance. When he finished eating, he turned back to her and found that she was reading a book. He didn't want to disturb her, so he just leaned back and tried to sleep. Sleep didn't come to him, but he relaxed and tried to remember the events of the past few days, which were fast becoming a blur. I gotta cut down on my drinking, he thought, or one of these days I won't even remember my own name. Suddenly, the stagecoach began slowing down.
What's the problem?
No problem at all. Gotta stop for another passenger.
Out here? Looks like we're 50 miles from anywhere.
Nevertheless.
Wonder what the hell he's doing out here. Pardon my language, ma'am.
I've heard worse.
The coach finally came to a halt. Bradshaw opened the door, and the new passenger entered. He was dressed all in black. Hat, coat, tie, pants, holster, gloves, boots. Even his long, drooping mustache was black. He wore a Colt 45 on each hip, and their ivory handles provided the only relief from the blackness that was everywhere else on him.
Good day, y'all,
he said, when he'd taken a seat next to Bradshaw across from Abigail.
Allow me to introduce myself. I know who you are. I've seen your face on enough posters. You're the Wichita Kid.
Do I look like a kid?
No, but you look like a man who's much too handy with those.
Well, it just so happens that I am the Wichita Kid. And I'm more than a little bit proficient with my weapons. But out here you have to be. Anyway, I'm too old to be a kid, so please just call me Wichita.
I'm sure you're proficient, but if you can get what you want with your brain...
Don't argue with him, ma'am. You're not going to change his mind, and it's not worth the effort.
If you say so, young man.
You listen to this young man, do you?
He's a very nice young man who respects his elders.
Those who live.
What are you talking about, sir?
Don't you know you've been sharing the coach with Bloody Ben Bradshaw? You'd be hard-pressed to name a place from the Dakotas to Texas, or from Missouri to Nevada, that hasn't offered a reward for him, dead or alive.
Is that true?
I can't deny it, ma'am. But don't you worry none. You're perfectly safe with me. She seemed to consider his answer for another moment, and then shrugged.
We're all here together. I suppose we might as well make the best of it.
Thank you, ma'am. I certainly don't mean to distress or upset you.
Nor do I. I'm just a passenger.
His gaze fell on her basket.
You wouldn't happen to have any extra victuals in there, would you, ma'am? I can hardly remember the last time I ate.
She opened the basket and looked into it.
Would you prefer a biscuit, a muffin, or perhaps some homemade bread?
Why, a muffin would be just fine, missus.
It's Miss Abigail Fletcher.
And a lovely name it is, Miss Abigail. This is quite tasty. Certainly better than any I've ever had in a restaurant.
It's my own recipe.
There's some kind of berry in it. Some kind of berry in there. Blueberry. Elderberry.
My secret.
Well, the recipe may be your secret, but it's a crying shame that the taste is pretty much a secret, too. You should open up a restaurant. People would flock to your door.
Oh, I doubt that.
They would if Bloody Ben and myself were urging them.
You know, somehow you two just don't seem like notorious killers.
I'm a notorious gambler, Miss Abigail. I almost never killed anyone who wasn't trying to cheat me or shoot me.
Almost never.
There are exceptions to every rule, Miss Abigail. I figure a church lady like yourself must know that.
Why should you think I'm a church lady?
Excuse me.
You dress modestly. You sit up properly. You display a Christian charity by feeding a hungry man.
2 hungry men.
Well, I'm certainly flattered by your judgment, mister. It seems very awkward to call you Mr. Kidd.
Just call me Wichita, Miss Abigail. Most everyone else does.
All right, then, Mr. Wichita.
Just Wichita will do.
Where are you bound to, Wichita?
As far from here as I can get. Things were getting a mite unsettled, if you know what I mean. And if you don't, Bloody Ben sure does.
It goes with the territory.
So where are you headed, Miss Abigail?
You know, it's the strangest thing, but I can't quite remember.
Well, let's find out. Hey, driver! How far's the lady gone?
To the end of the line.
Hope you brought a bunch of victuals. I have a feeling this line don't make too many stops.
It stopped for you.
I just stood out there and waited. I knew that sooner or later there'd be a coach along.
What happened to your horse? I don't mean this quite the way I'm sure it'll sound, but I thought all desperados had horses.
Must have gone lame, I suppose. Or I wouldn't have been standing out there waiting for a stage.
You were all alone out there. You must have walked a long way without your horse.
I suppose so.
Come to think of it, I can't recollect where I left Diamond.
Diamond?
My horse, ma'am. Pinto, but mostly white. Now and then, when the sun hits him just right, he glows like a diamond.
That's almost poetic.
Are you all right, Miss Abigail?
Why?
When you turned your head to face Ben, thought I saw a little blood just behind your temple.
Really?
She gingerly touched the spot he had indicated, then stared at her fingers.
Well, whatever it is dried. There's nothing on my hand.
Turn your head just a bit more.
She did so.
Well,
Looks for all the world like a bullet hole, Miss Abigail.
She frowned and blinked her eyes very rapidly.
you know, I vaguely remember telling Ezra he chops wood and does other chores for me, that if I caught him drinking one more time, I'd fire him. He went into a rage, and that's the very last thing I remember.
And you don't feel nothing, ma'am? No pain or main?
Not a thing. Does that mean I'm dead?
I hate to put it this way, Miss Abigail, but I never seen anyone survive a wound like that.
Well, who's going to weed my garden or get it ready for the next planting season? If I'm dead, what are you two doing here?
Beats me. Let's have a look.
He unbuttoned his black coat and opened it wide, revealing a small, neat hole.
There you go. One shot right through the heart.
Damn! How about you? You're not wearing a coat and I don't see any holes in you.
Well, I'd love to think I got on this coach by mistake. Well, suppose it stops for the wrong passengers.
Turn and face out the window. No, not just your head, your whole body.
Yep, there it is. You've been backshot.
Ah, it's my luck. Now I don't even know who to come back and hunt.
Wichita stared at Abigail for a long moment.
I got enormous respect for you, Miss Abigail. Me and Ben here, we're not surprised to be on this coach. Or at least we shouldn't be. We live with death every day, and there's no such thing as an old gunfighter, or even a middle-aged one, but you, Miss Abigail. I just admire the way you're taking this, not turning a hair and just worrying about what'll happen to your garden.
I love that garden. I never had a husband or children, so everything I had went into it.
Bradshaw reached over and gently patted her hand.
I wish there was something we could do, ma'am.
I appreciate the thought, but it's a little late now to worry about it.
They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, for a few miles, and then Wichita spoke up.
I always thought one of the advantages of being dead was that I wouldn't be so all-fired hungry all the time. But can I trouble you for another muffin, Miss Abigail?
Try this instead.
She said, handing him a piece of bread.
Thank you kindly.
He chewed thoughtfully and got a puzzled expression on his face.
It tastes like there was something sweet mixed into the batter. It's sort of half bread and half cake.
I'm very proud of it.
Well, what's it made out of?
If I told you, then it wouldn't be my own anymore, would it?
No, guess it wouldn't.
It seemed to them that the horses had picked up speed and had been galloping for miles. Then finally, they started slowing down.
I was wondering if those horses ever got tired,
Ain't tired.
Announced the driver.
Got one last passenger to pick up.
Him?
Looking out the window as the figure came into view.
Never expected to see him here this soon.
Who is it?
Apache Jack Keller.
Well, I don't believe I've ever heard of him.
He's a white man who grew up with the Apaches, ma'am. Fought for Victorio and Geronimo for a few years. Then turned in his feathers for a 10-gallon Stetson and his bow and arrows for a pair of 6 guns. He sent a lot of Indians and a lot of white men off to meet this stagecoach or one of his sisters. Arr.
The coach came to a stop, and Apache Jack Keller climbed aboard. He tipped his hat to Abigail, offered her a howdy, ma'am, and seated himself next to her.
I need a drink if I'm going to make up another voice. Pardon me. Well, sure looks like it's Bloody Ben and the kid from Wichita. Never expected to find you both on the same stagecoach. How are you doing, Jack? Not too well, evidently, or I wouldn't be sharing this ride with you. I took quite a while dying, and they always told me that Billy One-Eye was a dead shot. Then you know what this coach is? Yeah, can't spend that long dying and not know. Howdy, friend. What do we call you?
Scratch will do.
The driver tipped his hat, showing off his horns.
Now wait a minute. That's gotta be wrong. You don't think you've done enough sinning to get in? I done my share and then some, but so have you two.
Well, I've done my share and then some, and so have you two.
Said Bradshaw.
But Miss Abigail shouldn't be on this here stagecoach. There's been a serious mistake.
No, Ben. I belong here.
I don't believe it.
I'm sorry. There's too many names.
It is kind of hard to imagine a nice, proper, well-mannered lady like you.
It happened a long time ago. My sister was very much in love with a young man who betrayed and who humiliated her. It broke her heart, so I got a gun and broke his, literally. Oh, he had so many enemies that they never even considered that I might have been the one who killed him.
Well, if you did it, ma'am, I'm sure he deserved it. You at all hungry, Jack? She's packed some of the tastiest victuals you've ever encountered. I'd certainly like to try one out, if you're willing, ma'am.
She reached into her basket and handed him a pastry.
Those look even better than the muffin and the biscuits.
Have one. Here, you too, Ben.
She turned to Keller, who'd already bit into his.
How do you like it?
It's just about worth dying for, ma'am. If the Apaches could cook like this, I'd never have gone back to living with white folks. Except that none of the white folks could
cook like this either.
Thank you. You almost made me blush.
Seems a damn shame, pardon my language, ma'am, that no one else ever get a chance to partake of your cooking.
You know, just maybe we can do something about that.
Oh, well, where we're going? They got a lot bigger oven than she needs.
Probably they do. Or maybe I ain't ready to go there yet.
Well, none of us are. What's that got to do with it?
You know, the kid's got a point. Hey, Scratch, stop the stage.
Got a full coach.
Answered Scratch.
Can't handle any more passengers this trip.
Stop anyway.
This better be important.
Said Scratch, bringing the coach to a halt. Abigail leaned her head out the window and saw that the horses were snorting smoke, and their eyes glowed like hot coals.
Okay, we're stopped.
Continued Scratch, who remained perched atop the driver's seat.
Now what's all this about?
We're not ready to ride to the end of the line.
Scratch uttered an amused laugh.
Hardly anyone is. But that's where you're headed. I don't... I don't think so.
Said Wichita.
Me neither. I think we'll go off up the road a ways.
No, sir.
Snapped Scratch.
Your souls are mine.
I should think you'd be a little more reasonable, given all the souls we've already sent your way.
I thank you for them. But that doesn't change anything.
So you insist on taking us all away?
Absolutely.
Got a nice spread, have you?
Magnificent. You'll see it soon enough.
Hey, Ben, how did the Earp brothers wind up owning the Oriental Saloon down in Tombstone?
Pretty much the same way that Jubal Pickett took over the Crosshatch Ranch. They ran the old owners off.
And I
Can't remember this guy's voice.
and I hear that's how Red Jim McCabe got hold of half the gambling halls in Denver. And I'm Wichita.
Said Wichita. So if we, how long is this thing gonna go on? Okay. I hit my limit. So if we go all the way to the end of the line with you, and we like what we see, why, we just may take it over.
After all, what are you gonna do, kill us? It's out of the question. Well, you better think twice about this, Scratch.
Or you're gonna see just how much hell we three can raise.
Just remember, we're already dead, so what's the worst you can do to us compared to what we can do to you? They couldn't see Scratch's face, but they could hear him muttering and grumbling to himself.
Well,
Said Keller after a couple of minutes had passed.
Just the three of you. No members of your gangs. We don't belong to gangs.
and it's the four of us.
Her too.
especially her.
Hell, if you want a real chippy, I got a few million at home.
You insult her once more, and I'm going to climb up there and give you a lesson in manners. Now apologize to the lady.
You're kidding, right?
Lean down, look at my face, and tell me if you think I'm kidding.
Scratch emitted a sigh of defeat.
All right, I apologize, lady.
Bradshaw turned to Abigail.
Is that good enough for you, ma'am?
She nodded an affirmative.
All right, but I'm gonna want to see something in return.
We'll take care of it.
Will you sign that in blood?
We ain't got no blood, remember?
All right, I'm sick of the sight of you. Where do you want me to let you off?
The next wood and water you come to.
It took the horses a hard half-hour of galloping, but finally they came to a sky-blue river running alongside a grove of tall cottonwood trees.
Remember this spot,
said Keller as the 4 passengers climbed down.
You're gonna be stopping here from now on.
Why would I ever want to see you again?
Because even the dead get hungry, and we've got ourselves the best cook we've ever encountered, living or dead.
They used the timber from the cottonwoods to build the place, and they called the finished way station, with her permission, Miss Abigail's rest stop. Given their particular skills, they were able to make sure that everyone behaved, and whenever an outsider wandered in, they sent him straight to Scratch's domain as their part of the bargain. They even added a faro table in the back room, and to this day it remains the most popular way station along the route of the hell-bound stagecoach.
Jeez, crazy. Good night.